Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a film it's kind of a big deal. It's one of those movies that always seems to top those best of all time lists.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about Citizen Kane.
You got it. Citizen Kane, 1941, Orson Welles. It's practically cinematic royalty. I mean, you look at those prestigious polls like British Film Institute's Sight and Sound or the American Film Institute's 100 Years, .100 movies, and it's always right up there. But what's really fascinating is how this film, this grand, sweeping epic, really boils down to one central mystery.
You're talking about Rosebud, right?
Yeah.
That single word uttered in the very first moments of the film.
Exactly. Charles Foster Kane, this incredibly powerful, enigmatic figure, utters Rosebud with his dying breath, and that's what sets the whole story in motion. So today, we're going to unpack that word. We're going to delve into Kane's life, explore those intricate themes, and, of course, we'll touch on those groundbreaking filmmaking techniques that made Citizen Kane such a revolutionary piece of cinema.
Sounds like a plan. Where do we even begin with a film this layered?
Well, we've got a ton of material to draw from. We've been poring over in-depth analyses of the movie, getting into the nitty-gritty of the plot, and really diving deep into the symbolism, the themes, and the technical innovations that set this film apart.
I'm ready to get started.
All right, let's jump right into it. The film opens with an ending. We see Charles Foster Kane, alone in his colossal estate, Xanadu, uttering that fateful word, Rosebud, before he dies.
Right from the start, you get this incredible contrast. You have this palatial estate filled with art and treasures from around the world, but there's this overwhelming sense of isolation surrounding Kane.
It's like all the wealth and power in the world couldn't bring him peace or connection. And then we're immediately thrown into this newsreel obituary, this rapid-fire montage that summarizes Kane's entire life, from his meteoric rise as a newspaper tycoon to his controversial personal life and his eventual retreat into seclusion.
It's such an effective way to introduce us to this larger-than-life figure. We get this sweeping overview of his public image, but it leaves us with so many questions. Who was the real Charles Foster Kane? What drove him? What did Rosebud mean to him?
And that's where the reporter, Jerry Thompson, comes in. He's tasked with unraveling the mystery of Rosebud. He's like a detective, piecing together the puzzle of Kane's life through interviews with those who knew him best.
And that's where things get really interesting, because each interview offers a different perspective, a different piece of the puzzle. It's like we're getting these glimpses of Kane through these fractured, often contradictory memories.
It's like everyone knew a different side of him, and maybe no one truly knew him completely. We hear from Bernstein, his loyal business manager, who speaks to Kane's ambition, his drive to build a media empire.
And then there's Jedediah Leland, his childhood friend, and later, a rival, who offers a more critical view, suggesting that Kane's ambition ultimately corrupted him, leading him down a path of isolation and disillusionment.
And of course, there's Susan Alexander, Kane's second wife. She represents Kane's yearning for love and connection, but their relationship is ultimately doomed by his controlling nature, his need to mold her into something she's not.
We also hear from Walter Parks Thatcher, Kane's guardian, who represents the world of finance and the influence it had on Kane's formative years. Through Thatcher, we get a glimpse of young Kane, the boy who was ripped from his family and thrust into a world of wealth and power.
And that seems to be a key turning point, doesn't it? That separation from his parents, that loss of innocence, seems to shape everything that comes after. It fuels his ambition, his need for control, his inability to truly connect with others.
It's almost as if he spends his entire life trying to recapture that lost innocence, that sense of belonging. He builds this empire, he surrounds himself with possessions, he even tries to manipulate and control the people around him.
He even ventures into politics. Remember that whole gubernatorial race? He was so close to winning, but then the scandal involving Susan Alexander erupts. That's a pretty significant turning point, isn't it?
Absolutely. That scandal, that public humiliation, seems to mark the beginning of his decline. He retreats further into himself, into the isolation of Xanadu, surrounded by his possessions, but ultimately alone.
And so the film presents us with this incredibly complex, tragic figure, a man who achieved everything he ever wanted, wealth, power, fame, but who ultimately failed to find what he truly longed for: love, connection, happiness.
And it's not just about King's personal story, is it? The film uses his life, his rise and fall, to explore some really profound themes, like the elusive nature of truth, the myth of the American dream, and the consequences of unchecked ambition.
Let's unpack those a bit, starting with this idea of truth. The film's narrative structure is so interesting, isn't it? It's told through these flashbacks, these fragmented memories from different perspectives. It's like we're constantly trying to piece together a puzzle, but we never get the full picture.
Exactly. It challenges the idea that there's one single objective truth. Instead, we're presented with these subjective interpretations, each colored by the speaker's own biases and experiences.
And the film forces us, the viewers, to become active participants in the storytelling. We have to sift through these conflicting accounts, weigh the evidence, and come to our own conclusions.
It's a really clever way of engaging the audience, of making us think critically about how we perceive the world and the people around us. And then you have that really potent theme of the American dream. Kane, in so many ways, embodies that dream, right? He's the self-made man, the rags to riches story.
He starts with nothing and builds this immense fortune. He has everything money can buy, but is he happy? Is he fulfilled?
That's the question the film asks us to consider. It challenges the idea that material success equals happiness. It suggests that there's something more, something deeper, that Kane, despite all his wealth and power, never seems to find.
And then there's Rosebud. It's the mystery that hangs over the entire film. What does it mean? What was Kane thinking of in his final moments?
The beauty of it is that the film never explicitly tells us. It leaves it open to interpretation, allowing each viewer to draw their own conclusions. But I think Rosebud represents something profound about Kane's character, something at the core of his being.
I've always seen it as a symbol of his lost innocence, his yearning for a simpler time before ambition and wealth took over. It's like he's reaching back to his childhood, to a time before he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders.
That makes sense. And it ties in with that recurring image of the snow globe, doesn't it? That fragile little world, a miniature version of a simpler, more peaceful existence. It's such a stark contrast to the vast, empty spaces of Xanadu.
And there's that heartbreaking moment when the snow globe slips from Kane's grasp and shatters on the floor. It's like a visual representation of his shattered dreams, his inability to hold on to that sense of childlike wonder.
It's also interesting to consider the parallels between Citizen Kane and another great American novel, The Great Gatsby. Both stories explore these themes of lost innocence, the illusion of the American dream, and the yearning for a past that can never be fully recaptured.
They both feature these larger-than-life figures who build these empires of wealth and power, but who are ultimately haunted by a sense of emptiness, a longing for something more.
And the ending of Citizen Kane, it's so simple yet so powerful, isn't it? The camera pans over this vast collection of Kane's possessions, these meaningless trinkets that filled his life, and then it settles on a simple wooden sled with the word Rosebud painted on it.
And then the sled is tossed into a furnace and consumed by flames. It's such a poignant moment, a visual representation of the loss of Kane's innocence, the burning away of his childhood dreams.
And the reporter, Thompson, he never figures out the meaning of Rosebud, does he? But that's not really the point, is it? We, the audience, we understand. We've seen the journey. We've witnessed the tragedy of Kane's life.
And visually, the film is just stunning. Those groundbreaking techniques that you mentioned earlier, like deep focus, the non-linear narrative, the innovative sound design, they all work together to create this incredibly immersive and emotionally resonant experience.
Wells and his cinematographer Greg Toland really pushed the boundaries of what was possible with the camera. Deep focus allowed them to keep everything in the frame sharp and in focus, creating these incredibly rich and detailed compositions.
It's like we're seeing the world through Kane's eyes, experiencing the depth and complexity of his surroundings, and the way they use low-angle shots. It really emphasizes the power dynamics at play.
And the nonlinear narrative, jumping back and forth in time, it keeps us engaged, keeps us guessing. It's almost like a detective story, slowly unraveling the mystery of Kane's life.
And the sound design, it's so subtle but so effective. The way they use overlapping dialogue to create this sense of realism, the way they transition between scenes with these sharp, almost jarring cuts, it's all so masterfully done.
These techniques weren't just gimmicks. They were integral to the storytelling. They helped to create this world, this atmosphere that draws you in and doesn't let go. And it's important to remember how revolutionary these techniques were at the time.
Citizen Kane was really ahead of its time, and its influence on filmmaking can still be seen today.
Absolutely. It's a film that continues to inspire and challenge filmmakers, pushing them to think outside the box, to experiment with new ways of telling stories.
So what about the initial reception to Citizen Kane? I mean, it's considered a masterpiece now, but was it always that way?
It's actually a pretty interesting story. The film was met with mixed reviews upon its release. Some critics recognized its brilliance right away, praising its technical innovations and its thematic depth.
But there was also quite a bit of controversy, right?
Oh yeah, a lot of that stemmed from the fact that the film was widely seen as a thinly veiled portrait of William Randolph Hearst, a real-life media mogul who was incredibly powerful and influential. He was not happy with the portrayal, to say the least.
I bet he wasn't. I mean, the film doesn't exactly paint a flattering picture of a man driven by ambition and power.
Right, and Hearst used his influence to try and suppress the film, to damage its reputation. He even tried to prevent it from being released altogether.
Wow, so it really faced some serious obstacles right out of the gate.
It did, but despite those challenges, Citizen Kane persevered. Its reputation grew over time, and it eventually earned its rightful place as one of the greatest films ever made.
It's a testament to the power of the film, to the enduring themes, and the groundbreaking techniques that continue to resonate with audiences today.
Absolutely. Citizen Kane is a film that stays with you. It makes you think about the big questions, about the nature of ambition, the meaning of success, the search for happiness, and the elusive nature of truth.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Citizen Kane, I'm left wondering about that central question, the question that drives the entire film. What does Rosebud mean to you?
It's a question worth pondering. It's a reminder that even the most successful, the most powerful among us can still yearn for something more, for something lost, for something that maybe can never be fully recovered.
And I think that's the enduring legacy of Citizen Kane. It's a film that challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question our assumptions, and to grapple with the complexities of the human experience.
It's a film that, even after all these years, continues to provoke, to inspire, and to remind us of the power of cinema to tell stories that matter.
So for those of you who haven't seen Citizen Kane, I highly recommend checking it out. It's a truly remarkable film, a landmark achievement in cinematic history. And for those of you who have seen it, maybe it's time for a rewatch. There's always something new to discover in this timeless masterpiece.
I couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Citizen Kane. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.
See you next time.
Bye for now.